Greetings. Greetings, faculty, students, staff, friends of the Center for Black Literature. Welcome to our town hall meeting. Black writers address activism before, during, and after, most hopefully, the age of Trump. Presented by the Center for Black Literature as a program of the 15th National Black Writers Conference, Activism, Identity, and Race, Playwrights and Screenwriters at the Crossroads, and in partnership with the Department of Public Administration, the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and the Center for Law and Social Justice. I'm very, very pleased also to welcome our special guests, Gloria Browne-Marshall, Nikole Hannah-Jones, and Lee Daniels. Thank you so much for attending this town hall meeting. I am Dr. Brenda Green, the founder and executive director of the Center for Black Literature, director of the National Black Writers Conference, and professor of English at Medgar Evers College. We are in an historic moment, and like many of you, I am dismayed by the state of politics in this country. We're in the midst of a moment that is an indictment of our democracy, and we've been reminded of the harsh reality that voter suppression, racism, xenophobia, and a climate of misinformation are very much alive. We have much work to do, and our writers are crucial in ensuring that the public is informed and assisting us with laying a path forward. We have to remember the legacy of those writers who paved the way and who persisted. This is our time. A little about the Center for Black Literature. Founded in 2002, the Center for Black Literature has a mission to expand, broaden, and enrich the public's knowledge and aesthetic appreciation of Black literature by people of the African diaspora. To achieve its mission, the center offers literary programs and educational workshops for the public, students of all ages, teachers, writers, and artists. Among our core programs are the National Black Writers Conference, the Re-envisioning Our Lives for Literature program, the Wild Seeds Writers Retreat, the Dr. Edith Rock Elder Writers Workshop, the weekly Writers on Writing radio program, and our journals, the Killen's Review of Arts and Letters, and the journals and publications that we generate from our youth and elder programs. This town hall, as I said, is a pre-conference program of the 15th National Black Writers Conference, which will be held Wednesday, November the 11th through Saturday, September the 14th. The conference is a public gathering of writers, scholars, literary professionals, theater and film luminaries, students, and the public. And this year we will honor playwrights, screenwriters, documentarians, and filmmakers, Carl Clay, Dominique Morisseau, Stanley Nelson, Vosa Rivers, and Richard Wesley. It takes a village to host a conference, and I thank the Center for Black Literature staff and team, the National Black Writers Steering Committee, Aquila Works Songs, a presenting partner for the 15th National Black Writers Conference, and all of our program and media sponsors. So now I will turn this over to our moderator, Professor Wallace Ford. Professor Ford teaches in the Department of Public Administration at Medgar Evers College. His highly trafficked point of view contemporary commentary blog, thewallaceford.com, is now read in more than 60 countries. He's also a frequent commentator on political issues on television and radio, and he has lectured and spoken at conferences throughout the United States and at various venues throughout the world. Ford has also published 2 novels, The Pride and What You Sow, and he's a regular contributor to Black Renaissance Noir. Thank you and welcome to Professor Wallace Ford.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Green, for that kind introduction. And I just want to say to all who are in attendance, this is certainly a momentous event. This is the first time we've done the National Black Writers Conference via Zoom, so it's virtual, but it's still real. And we're going to make it that way tonight for sure. So, it is my job as the moderator, really my pleasure and honor as the moderator, to just really kind of make sure we kind of keep it going and make sure that we have a full discussion, first from our panelists, and who I'm going to introduce now, and then from you who are in the audience as well. And so we're going to just move on from there. And, so first let me introduce our panelists. We have Ms. Nikole Hannah-Jones, and she's a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter covering racial injustice for the New York Times Magazine and a creator of the landmark 1619 Project. In 2017, she received a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, also known as the Genius Grant, for her work on educational inequality. And she has also won a Peabody Award, 2 George Polk Awards, 3 National Magazines Awards, and the 2018 John Chancellor Distinguished Journalism Award from Columbia University. In 2016, Hannah-Jones co-founded the Ida B. Wells Society for Investigative Reporting, a training and mentorship organization geared towards increasing the numbers of investigative reporters of color. Welcome, Nikole Hannah-Jones. We have Lee Daniels. He has been a reporter for WGBH TV in Boston, a reporter and writer for the Washington Post, and a writer for the New York Times, as well as an editor of the National Urban League's The State of Black America for a number of years. He's collaborated on books with Rachel Robinson and Vernon E. Jordan Jr., and is the author of Last Chance, The Political Threat to Black America. And as they say in these situations, last but certainly not least, Gloria J. Browne-Marshall. She has many books, including Race, Law, and American Society, 1607 to the present, The Voting Rights War, the NAACP, and the Ongoing Struggle for Justice. And the forthcoming book, She Took Justice, The Black Women, Law, and the Power. Her poem, White Privilege, appeared in Aesthetic Apostle, and she's a professor at John Jay College, part of the CUNY system, and therefore a sister school of Medgar Evers College, a civil rights attorney and a produced playwright with award-winning essays in the Milwaukee Courier. Professor Browne-Marshall is at work on her first novel. And so I think the introduction kind of says it all, that we kind of have a high-powered group here today. And as I said, my job is to kind of tee it up, and then we're going to go forward. But obviously, we're here the day after probably the most momentous election in American history, with the possible exception of the 1932 election involving Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt, or the 1964 election where Abraham Lincoln almost didn't make it. Right. So I'm reminded, as I was watching the various news programs at the beginning of last night, that is a quote from Charles Dickens panel from The Tale of Two Cities. There's the best of times and the worst of times. And I said, well, yeah, it really is kind of like that. and watched it. And of course, as we were all whipsawed by he's up, he's down, he's up. This is like one of Muhammad Ali's fights or something. And we just said, what is going to happen? And ultimately, I dozed off around 1, 2 in the morning, and it was very, very close. And I woke up around 5:30, and it sounded like Trump had won. And then I was reminded of a quote by the late Gil Scott-Heron from his song "Winter in America," and one of the last lines on that is just "Save your soul." And but kept watching a little bit longer, and it sounds like, and as we speak right now, it appears that Joe Biden is within 6 votes of the Electoral College, and so we're now quoting Edwin Hawkins and is saying, "Oh, happy day." So that's kind of where we begin. And what I'd like to ask all of you, beginning with Dr. Marshall, Professor Marshall, and I'd ask, this is to the audience to let you know that I had asked our panelists to, on Monday, before the election began, before the vote count began, to write down before midnight of November the 2nd what you thought it would be like by the time we arrived at 6:30 on November 4th, the day after the election. And so again, Professor Marshall, it's my pleasure to introduce you and invite you to begin our discussion. And then, but if you could answer that first question, and then go for it. And as I said, each of the panelists is going to speak for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we're going to have an open discussion. And then, as I said, we're going to have a open discussion with the town hall and all of you in attendance. Professor Marshall, as they say, it's all yours now.
Well, thank you so much. And I thank everyone who's here. I appreciate it. And I'm a fan of Nikole Hannah-Jones. So, and Lee Daniels. So I'm just like stepping in high cotton over here. I'd like to say first, I thought when I wrote my prediction down, that I also said that I thought that Amy Coney Barrett wouldn't make it to the Supreme Court. So you can't put too much on what I write there. But I said that Joe Biden would be in the lead, but I also wrote down that it would be another Bush versus Gore, in which there would be a lot of litigation going to the Supreme Court. And I was hoping that the Supreme Court would not create our presidential system. I was hoping that the Supreme Court would not give us another decision that was politically based and therefore undermine the strength and what is considered in most part the neutral place of the highest court. I say this because I teach constitutional law, but I also am a legal historian who focuses on race and the law. And I teach that as well. But I also teach evidence. And when I put all of that together, it leads me to believe that we're in a country that has been racially divided since its very beginning. We know, and I can't say it clearly enough, I was the 400th commemoration chair for our 1619 project for the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And we know that in August of 1619, 20 Africans arrived in the Jamestown settlement, which is in the Virginia colony. We also know that 1 month before that, the House of Burgesses was formed, the legal legislative body. And it's from that combination that we had the perfect storm for the greed that ended with chattel slavery. And the reason why I put slavery in the context of greed, because when you have people who are landholders, and because they are landholders, they have the control not over just the land, but those who are going to work their land to give them more profit. I put slavery in the term of greed because they decided, why not just hold all the profit and not pay any workers anything? And if we create laws to do this, then more better for us. Well, here's the problem. When those 20 and odd Negroes arrived in August of 1619, there were no slave laws in the colony. So when I talk about legal status, indentured servitude, yes, of the Europeans, legal status of those Africans were in question. So instead of taking them in, brother, sister, people who had been treated unfairly, who had been kidnapped twice, first from their homeland and then from a ship on the high seas, taken to the first English port, which was that Jamestown settlement. They could have been taken in as brother, sister, kinfolk, human beings. And we have Marion Anthony Johnson. And the reason why I say this in the context of voting rights, because Marion Anthony Johnson rose up as indentured servants, had land of their own. They had servants, European and African servants of their own. But what did they also have? They had the right to have a voice in that colony. And that's when they decided that they would not have an African vote in that colony. They would not have an African voice. So what happened in that colony was 2 steps forward and 1 step back. That has been the pattern and practice when it comes to voting rights in this country for the next 400 odd years. 2 steps forward when we do everything we're supposed to do to gain voting rights, and then 1 step back. And so when they talk about the power of the Black vote, that power of the Black vote was there in 1870, because this is also the 150th anniversary of Black men gaining the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. And as soon as they did, we had Black U.S. senators, Black U.S. representatives. We had over 4,000 Black men in office. We had Black women who were beginning their grassroots organizing skills in the 1800s as Black suffragettes, who were ostracized from the white suffragettes movement, but moved on to themselves anyway. And with, of course, the 100th anniversary of the 1920 gaining of women in the right to vote, with that amendment, we had crushing oppression on Black women because they feared the power of the Black woman's vote. And now here we have a Black woman on the ticket. Here we have the role of the Black vote making the difference in this election, as it's made a difference in so many more. So yes, I said that Joe Biden would be the winner of this election. But once again, as I said, Amy Coney Barrett would also be on the Supreme Court, 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Marshall. That is a Browne-Marshall. That is certainly a great way to start, because indeed, the whole notion of racism and slavery, as you said, was baked into the system really from the very beginning. And as you know, and our students who are studying constitutional law know, I'm sure, when they hear from you, as they hear from me, that slavery was baked into the Constitution from the very beginning. From the very, very beginning, and we were still reaping the harvest of that, the bitter harvest. Mr. Lee Daniels, a longtime friend and colleague, and it's certainly a pleasure to have you as a panelist. I was trying to give you a moment to compose yourself before going forward, sir. So if you want to, it's your turn. Thank you. Okay, your microphone. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm here.
Okay, great.
I'm very glad to be here with my co-panelist, and I must say the powerful comments of Professor Browne-Marshall recalled for me a moment 50 years ago, when 50 plus years ago, when Martin Luther King was assassinated. The end of my first year in college, and that very night, as the televisions were endlessly playing the loop of King's speech at the temple in Memphis and emphasizing his words that we as a people will get to the promised land, what I noticed, what I took to heart, were words that he had said just before that. He had said, well, I don't know what's going to happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. And for me, not being all that acquainted with the Bible, I wondered whether the days he was referring to meant days in the biblical sense or days in the contemporary sense. And I concluded that he meant days in the biblical sense, which to me meant generations. So I've never been a devotee of the promised land notion. Here we are again at one of those moments in American history where it's clear we're significantly less farther along than many of us on the progressive side had thought. When Wallace asked us to make a prediction as to where we'd be, that is where the presidential election would be when we met, I predicted that the results of the election would be clear last night, even if the vote count specifically wasn't. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But I wrote down a number of bullet points that I'm just going to read off. As I said, we're at a moment where we have been brought up short by the proof that we're significantly less farther along than many of us on the progressive side had thought. The Trump administration had already shown the world, what wide-scale governmental corruption looks like, what widespread governmental mismanagement looks like, and what quote unquote political correctness really is, and which side of the liberal conservative divide really adheres to it. And yet we've seen again that for many, many whites, a conservative white hegemony is worth death, destruction of democracy, whatever. Some of us had always considered the white majority's commitment to democracy to be as thin as tissue paper. This election is more proof of that we are still awaiting the outcome now, and that many people on the Democratic side are stunned that we need to do so, is a measure of how profound the white on white civil war over the future of the country has become, as the country has become less white Christian, as other Americans and the LGBTQ coalition and progressive-minded whites become more numerous. Also, we see, perhaps in a sense terrifyingly, more clearly the cult dynamic commitment of many, many whites to Trump as the leader of the white fortress movement. Given that the states where the coronavirus is now raging most ferociously are the states which have gone most ferociously for Trump, we can say this is really taking on the characteristics of a death cult. That attitude among millions upon millions of whites is not going away. It's not going away in the state legislatures. It's not going away in the Congress. Everything will be a fight. Everything will be a fight. Just one final thing that piqued my interest. Apparently the 18% Black male vote for Trump. In any situation of oppression, I long ago realized there will always be some in the oppressed group who are complicit with the oppressors. That's human nature. I'm sure there will be numerous studies and articles on the 18% who pulled the lever for him. There are numerous explanations, many of which will track along why men as a group tend to support Trump. There will be, as I say, many explanations. For me, there's no excuse. It's a despicable act. However, I suspect there will be far more media attention to that fact than the development of the continuing bizarre voting behavior of blue-collar white conservative men, and to the exit polls today showing that 36% of Latino Hispanic men and 28% of Latina Hispanic women voted for Trump. I do have some good things to say about the election, but I'll hold those in abeyance.
Thank you very much, Lee. And we're going to get back to that comment about the remainder or what's left, even if Trump is no longer the president of the United States. But the time is moving forward. I want to ask our next guest panelist, Nikole Hannah-Jones. Thank you again for joining us today. And as I said, as they say in these situations, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. So first, I just want to say, Dr. Browne-Marshall, I am also a fan. I have your book on race and the law. I've used it numerous times in my own research. So just excited to be on here with you today, and wish we could all be in person, but thankful for everyone who joined in the talk today. So I'm going to start by saying that much as it was when I was in school, I didn't actually do my homework. So I didn't write down my predictions for the election. And that's really because I don't tend to try to make predictions about such things. I have learned as both a student of history and as a journalist that trying to predict American politics, particularly in a highly racialized atmosphere, is a fool's errand. And I try as much as possible not to look foolish. So I did not make any prediction because I think it was impossible really to know, despite all of the polling data that was saying Biden was leading, what white Americans were really going to do. And the truth is, white Americans will say one thing to pollsters, but we know vote in different ways. And I also always understood that the Latino vote was going to be somewhat unpredictable. We treat Latinos as a racial category, but it's not a racial category. And as we know, Latinos can be Black, they can be Indigenous, they can be white, they can be mixed, and the majority of Latinos identify as white. So, you know, it shouldn't be surprising that people who come from nearly 24 countries with vastly different experiences and backgrounds, some who are immigrants, some who have been here for many generations, some would be conservative, some would identify with Trump, and that should not be surprising. The Latino vote has long been a split vote. And actually, if the Republicans could get their acts together, they could probably cleave off a much larger percentage of that vote than they currently have, which were not, you know, my prepared remarks. And then I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'll briefly talk about kind of your question. As for the Black male vote for the exit poll, I just would like to caution us about extrapolating too much from that poll right now. We do know that the Black male vote was considerably higher in 2016 than the Black female vote. I think it was about double the Black female vote or Black woman vote. But I don't know that we can actually trust that poll. We know that exit polls are notoriously bad. And we know that Black voters, particularly progressive voters, were far less likely to vote in person. And so those who would have higher support for Trump would be much more likely to vote in person. So I don't know that we're going to see it at 18%. It's going to be higher than in Black women, but I would be really surprised if that 1 in 5 number stands up. Still, there is work to do because there was also some polling that showed that Black male support declined when they found out that Biden's running mate was going to be a Black woman, and that there was actually higher support for among Black voters for a white woman candidate than a Black woman candidate. So y'all do have some stuff you need to work on, but I don't know if it's going to be that high. Now, very quickly, when I think about this election, of course, I think about almost everything in the context of the 400-year history of this country. And in that case, nothing is surprising. We understand that from the beginning, this has been a country that espoused ideals of democracy, but the practice that was in opposition to democracy. When Dr. Browne-Marshall talks about 1619 being both the year of representative governance, the first representative governance in the Virginia colony, and also the introduction of slavery into the Virginia colony, those have been the defining features of the country that will become the United States. We were founded on ideals of universal rights and equality by men who owned other human beings and deprived those human beings of all of those rights and privileges that they wrote in those documents. So we've never actually been a country where a white majority has believed in democracy, if democracy means all people in a country have a right to vote and a right to representative governance. What we have believed in is democracy for a white majority and democracy that maintains power for a white majority. And so it's been an amazing, as you all probably know, the 1619 Project has faced rather unrelenting attack for the last year, including a executive order from the President of the United States. But in fact, this election only proves the thesis of the 1619 Project, which is that we are still haunted by the legacy of slavery. The fact that you could have a president win the popular vote, as Hillary Clinton did, as Al Gore did, and still lose the election due to the Electoral College, which is a legacy of slavery, which actually gives heavily white states more power than it does states that actually reflect the demographics of our country, I think proves the thesis. And I've been thinking especially about my opening essay for the 1619 Project on democracy and how the unparalleled role that Black Americans have played really since the 1770s has been to be the perfecters of the democracy, to force our country through our resistance, through our blood, and through our vote to try to live up to its founding ideals. And we know that once again, Black people have been called on to save this democracy from itself. And if Joe Biden does indeed pull out this win, it's going to be largely because of Black people in Detroit, in Milwaukee, and in Philadelphia, who came out, who, despite every effort to suppress the vote, to make voting difficult, to lose ballots, the Black folks came out in those key battleground states. And so if the win comes, it is going to be because once again, Black people have played this unparalleled role in believing in democracy and perfecting the democracy. So that's, I don't have a prediction. I don't know what's going to happen, but I will say one can always predict that Black people will believe in this country even when no one else does. Now you're muted.
Yes, I am, but now I'm not. Thank you very much, Nikole. And we're going to try to, I guess this is going into the lightning round now, I guess is what we have here. And my job is to just kind of like throw out some thoughts and let the three of you react to it as you wish. I'm just making a couple of notes with respect to the comments that the three of you were making. And several things jumped out, but two things I'd like to put out there. One has to do with, because the initial question I was going to put out, which is, so this is an offshoot of the initial question was, well, what does Black activism, particularly by writers, look like now going forward? But I think the three of you helped me kind of fine tune that to say, we're looking at a couple of very real issues that didn't reveal themselves, but made themselves known more publicly. One has to do with this question of minority rule, which is yet one more thing that was baked into the Constitution from the very beginning, and what minority rule is going to look like when that minority is white Americans. And the other part, of course, is that we've always seen voter suppression, but when many people, when they think of it, they think of counting jelly beans in a jar before you can vote, or having to spell chrysanthemum backwards and all of those kinds of things. But voter suppression today, to me, looks like waiting in line 5 hours in order to vote. Having to go through all kinds of machinations just to be able to vote, when around the world it's been a lot easier for people to vote. The only reason why voting is even on a Tuesday has to do with something trying to accommodate farmers from back in the 1800s. So my question is a dual question, and I'll leave it to the three of you to and perhaps I'll ask you, Gloria Browne-Marshall, if you want to kick off. But after that, it's open mic. But just in terms of what is I named two issues that could certainly be just the sole focus of activism going forward. There's so many more. Your thoughts, please.
Well, I focus on the right of the people to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And that line is the last line of the First Amendment. Most people focus on free speech or press or assembly, but the right of the people to petition, to ask the government for a redress, a change, a remedy of a grievance, a complaint, that is a line that is fully there in the First Amendment. And I think that makes everybody an activist. And I've during my time period, in my background as a civil rights attorney, and I've spoken different places, and I've spoken to mothers who became activists because their children were born with special needs. I've spoken to mothers and sons and people in the community who, because of lead paint or lead in the water or whatever it may be, they had to become community activists. I've spoken to people because the educational system was in such disrepair that they had to be educational activists. So to me, activism is to act. As a writer, I am so pleased and blessed that I write across genre. Now, this is upsetting to many people because you're not supposed to, that, for folks that don't know, writing across genre is not in right now. So, so you're supposed to choose one place, be a playwright. I used to write a weekly column, you know, and it's like, oh, you're not supposed to be a journalist or a legal correspondent. I used to cover the US Supreme Court when we could get into the court. You're not supposed to do that. I write books. I'm working on a novel. I think as a writer, I write, as Stephen Biko said, I write what I plead. I write what I want. And so I write what expresses what I need to say about what I see needs to be changed. And I wrote for 10 years, I worked on this book, She Took Justice. And because I saw Black women's role not as something that somebody else created, but I start my book with Queen Nzinga to say we already had these qualities. What we had was a foot on our back and a lack of opportunity to let these qualities shine. So I feel like I've always been a Black woman. And that's why I write poetry, Enjoying the Darkness. You know, I feel like my poems may express something that my book can't, or maybe my speech does. I don't know. But all I know is that inside of me, to stay spiritually and physically and mentally healthy, I must act. And I must get other people empowered. And that's what I do. Try to empower people around the Constitution, as corny as it might be. That's what I want to do. I want people to know their rights. I want people to act on their rights. I want people to affect the government that has been affecting them all their lives and understand the power of the government can be thwarted sometimes. You know, it's like a boxing match. You throw some punches. Sometimes you get hit and sometimes you duck and move. And sometimes you have to do the rope-a-dope. Either way it goes, you don't just sit there and be acted upon because it's unhealthy and you're not going to win.
Okay, well, Lee, Nikole, any thoughts? Of course you have thoughts. Would you care to share your thoughts? If they be more like
one thing I think, and you know, Gloria's remarks are very well taken, and especially now, because of the times, but also because people who write in whatever form have much more access to sharing their ideas and thoughts. The other part of that is the transformation of the legacy media and how many small newspapers have already disappeared. We have newspaper deserts across the country. The other part of that is there are these hedge funds, which some call vulture organizations, who buy up local newspapers, strip them of their assets, and then either close them down or run essentially what one can call a paper mill, and they're usually conservative. So in some sense, even with the greater access the social media has brought, and the high profile journalism that several of our legacy media are doing, there are reasons to be worried about people's ability to communicate powerfully with one another, beyond Twitter, beyond the social media that we know, right? That's just a facet that worries me greatly.
Okay. All right. Well, Nikole, just on that theme for a moment, and you know, on the one hand, you know, I can't tell you the last time. Well, yeah, I get a newspaper delivered on the weekends. New York Times, you'd be glad to know, and you know, but I also I read the newspaper and then just about everything else online during the week, and you know, I rarely see a magazine anymore and what have you. But we have all of these vehicles and platforms for communication that we didn't have, that literally didn't exist a decade ago. Does that make a difference in terms of you as a writer, in terms of I mean, whether you want to be or not, you are an activist, and you know, and more than name only. Are these additional tools, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the blessing and the curse. On the one hand, we have seen a democratization, right? Where you don't have to write for a handful of legacy media and go through all of those gatekeepers in order to do your reporting. However, that also means that people are competing for, there's a lot more places that you can get your information from. And as we know, after 4 years of the Trump presidency, an increasing inability of Americans to discern between what is actual reporting and journalism and what is not, what is a trustworthy source of information and what is not. So I do think that there's amazing writing and journalism that is coming out of organizations that are not traditional media, and I think that is excellent. That those media kept out many writers for decades, centuries. But and I also think social media has been democratizing, right? So there used to be a time not too long ago where if the New York Times wrote something that offended a Black person or a brown person or a queer person, the most that you could do was write a letter to the editor and hope that the New York Times might publish it. Now people go directly to social and they call out news organizations and they're able to change coverage in real time, which I think is really important. But that also has meant that because anybody can be a journalist, what are the actual tenets of our profession? Do we all have the same ethics? Do we all have the same journalistic values? Are all of us doing trustworthy journalism? And do we have the resources? Because so much of what we see now are people writing opinions, but we actually still need actual reporting. We need people who are actually, sitting through that county government meeting. We need people who are reading those court documents. And I think there is, in some ways, less of that than there was before, which I'm very worried about, particularly for vulnerable communities, because we are not seeing the expansion of media serving our communities, I think, in a non-superficial way.
Okay, all right. We're going to, this is not the last time panel that you're going to be asked to make comments. We did indicate that this is a town hall kind of situation. So we want to, we're hearing from some of our participants. We have over 100 people on at this point. It's really quite amazing. And some of those 100 people have to take a moderator's point of privilege for a moment. Some of the people participating are students of mine. And so I told the students that they would get course credit if they attended. And they said, well, how would you know that I'm attending? And I'm not going to keep scrolling through the chat room, keeping track, but I said, I'm going to give out a code. Okay. And if you email the code back to me, then I will know that you were at the attendance. So forgive me for a moment. I have to give out the code, and it's just FORD13. Okay, so FORD13, that's the code. You email it to me and you get credit, and there we go. So now we have a couple of questions. So we have Dr. Deirdre Dees. And Dr. Dees, you sent in a question by chat. I'm not going to read it because it's your question. So if you want to convey the question to the panel, and panel, it's jump ball. Dr. Dees, there you go.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ford. I want to know, how can we as writers write strongly enough to detract whites from the allure of oppression? What can we do to stave that off? We write and we write and we write, but are they reading what we write?
Great question. Panel, I'm not going to treat you like my students in class and pick on somebody. So anybody want to speak up?
I mean, I would say, thank you for that question, that we're all trying to figure that out. We're all trying to figure out how can we write in ways that can transform a 400-year racial caste system. The way that I do it is I really try to tell a surprising story. I try to write about things that people think they know in a way that they don't know it. I try to be brutally honest in my writing. I don't write in a way that soft pedals our history, and I don't spend a lot of time worrying about how people will feel about what it is that I write. And I also, of course, imbue my writing with a lot of history, because what I have found We don't speak the same language because we don't have the same understanding. And it can be very difficult to convince people with your writing that they need to do something differently in regards to racial inequality when they actually have no foundation, no understanding of all of the resources and time and effort that went into creating it. So that's what I do, but I would be interested to hear what other people think. I actually feel like all the time I write just because I'm not going to let people pretend that they didn't know better, but I don't actually expect anything to change from what I write.
Okay. Mr. Daniels, any thoughts for Dr. Dees?
Yes, I would just say that this is one of the good things I was going to say about the election, which is that it did confirm what these last 4 years have confirmed, which is that the growth in the number of people, white people, white progressives, other Americans of color, and Black people has been noteworthy, I think. I had very low expectations on November 10th, 2016. I had very low expectations of the future. And I was happily stunned on January 21st, 2017, when the Worldwide Women's March kicked off. I did not expect that at all. What we have seen over the last 4 years is a lot more people, I think, getting it, coming to an understanding that there's been a longstanding crisis and the crisis is here now. And I think with the George Floyd protest and the Breonna Taylor protest and so forth and so on, that we can take heart that progress is being made, even though the fight is still severe.
So it's supposed to be a conversation, so I just got to interject here. I think we should not think about this as just a fight against white people who support Trump. We are in New York City, the most segregated large school system in the country, third most segregated city in the country, and this is a blue city in a blue state. New York State is the most racially segregated for Black children in the country. California is the most racially segregated state for Latino children in the country. These states go blue every year. So I don't actually write to Trump people. I'm not even trying to convince them. I'm writing to white progressives who say they're on our side, who say they believe in equality, and yet do not do things that lead to equality in housing, in schools, in employment. And so the thing that I fear is that Trump has been easy because people in New York who are fighting against school integration, who are fighting against ending screens for children, who are fighting to keep that racist test that keeps almost every Black and brown kid out of our specialized public schools, can say, I'm not that. I'm not like that. And then they don't actually have to deal with the way that they uphold the system of racial hierarchy as well. I always, when I give talks, show a slide of the Women's March, and it's of white women holding a sign that says, if Hillary had won, we'd be at brunch right now. I always show that sign because I say that epitomizes the problem, that if it doesn't affect them, they can just go back home and live their lives. But Black folks were suffering before Trump, and Black folks will suffer if Joe Biden wins tomorrow. And I think we should be honest about who it is that we're writing for and what this work can actually do. Sorry, Dr. Browne-Marshall.
Yeah, I want to interject. I want to say this, and it's going to be a little bit controversial depending on how you look at it, but everybody in here is
a little bit. Okay, just a little bit.
There are two ways of looking at writing. And this is an issue I had with an editor of mine. And I said, you want me to write my book for white people? And I know that Toni Morrison said, once you pop the white man off your shoulder, because he's looking at your shoulder, deciding to, helping you censor your work because you're supposed to be writing for a white audience and a white readership. I think two things happen, and this is how it's divided up. We write about Black life to explain it to white people. I write about Black life to explain us to us. Did everybody hear that? Mm-hmm. And this is something that's rarely ever said. So I'm glad I have a chance to say it. I wrote for a Black newspaper to explain us, the US Supreme Court, to us. And the reason why when people read my work and they're like, well, I'm not quite sure I get it. It's like, because I didn't write it for a white readership to convince you that we are worthy. I tell you, I am a proud African American. I tell you, I know my history enough to know the reason why I am proud is based in fact, in mind, and spirit. So when I write about my history, I think white people are accomplished enough to read a book that I've written about African American life to a Black audience, and they can still get it, because every day, every program, every commercial, everything is written and done for a white audience, and all these other people of color from different cultures, different languages, figure out how to still brush their teeth with Crest and buy a Toyota or whatever it is they want to do. They still figure out how to do it. And I think we have been coddling a white audience too long, that they are too sensitive to understand or have to take a moment to actually get something that we're writing that's written about us, for us, that they can gain as well. And so when I'm writing, I understand, and I write textbooks too. And the textbooks are boring textbooks that people use in classrooms, and that's fine. I don't have any racial component in my head when I write that textbook. But I know I'm getting tired of people who are writing about us to explain us to white people without sensing that now what you're actually doing is making Black people do with what we do with white writers all the time. Find ourselves in the mix. Yeah. So that's why I say it's kind of controversial that I'm saying this.
No, it's
I don't think that's controversial.
No, it's definitely the truth. It's definitely the truth. And we have a couple other questions here. Just one point, Nikole, that you're talking about New York. Yeah, I've been living in New York City basically certainly all my adult life. And at one point, in terms of this segregation business, because New York, because it's so hip and it's so cosmopolitan and it's so international, they said, well, obviously this can't be a racist city. And I can tell you just one personal example. At one point, I was working for David Dinkins when he was mayor, and I was commissioner of the Department of Business Services, real quick. And I would be invited to the New York City Association of Pipe Fitters, or the New York Association of And when I would walk in there, I felt like I needed to sing "We Shall Overcome." Because the only reason I was there is because I was ex officio, because I was a commissioner, and otherwise it had just been an all-white gathering. That still exists really throughout the city. It's a very, very, it may indeed be the most segregated city in the United States, whether you're talking about housing, economics, business, and what have you. And so it is just a truth here. We have a question from, I'm going to take, again, just a moderator's point of privilege. One of my students from my Introduction to Public Administration class has a question there. Ms. Coombs, are you still there? Wesley Ann Coombs, are you there? Okay, you had a question?
Yes, I'm here.
Please convey it to the panel.
Okay, so hi everyone, good afternoon, good night. I'm listening to the feedback, great feedback, beautiful points. My question is, as African Americans, we don't read as we ought to. So therefore, Nikole, from a journalist's point of view, we don't get into journals, and Ms. Marshall, books like those, we don't get into books like those, right? Books to really sustain and educate us as African Americans. What can we do, or what can you do as the journalist, Nikole, and Ms. Marshall, you as a writer, to kind of attract our people and get them more into reading substantial good literature?
I mean, I'm gonna have to start by saying I think that's a stereotype and incorrect. We do come from an anti-intellectual society, but that is not endemic to Black Americans. That's just Americans. I mean, look who's in the White House right now. So I don't believe that it's true that Black people don't read substantial material, and Black people don't read widely any more than any other racial group. Has large numbers of people who would rather read superficial things versus substantial. What I can tell you is, if you produce content that respects people, that gives them information in a way that is interesting to them, that is reflective of their circumstances, they will read it. When we produced the 1619 Project, we sold out of the 1619 Project all over the country. And this was not, white people. These are people in the hood. These are people who were, we did a talk in Baltimore at the art museum there, and they'd never had that many Black people at any event in Baltimore at the art museum as when they came to get the 1619 Project. I daily get requests from Black folks who say, how can I get a copy of the 1619 Project because it's sold out? It's just so much of what is written, as Dr. Browne-Marshall said, is not written for us. So I would just ask that we don't stereotype our community in that way as if we are not readers, because we are.
And I just want to add this other point to it. It also comes down to, where are the bookstores? I mean, and in the bookstore, are these, as was pointed out, readily accessible books that are written about our experiences, about our interests? I mean, even when you start thinking about comic books, I remember being at the Philadelphia Writers Conference and seeing Black comic book makers, and then you never saw them again because they weren't being sustained. They didn't have the money coming in to sustain their comic books to distribute. This comes down to distribution. There are so many Black people who have self-published books, but they can't distribute the books. So now distribution has become a major issue. How do you get your book to the audience, to the reader? And also, one of the things I find with books of mine in particular, people say, oh, I respect you so much, Professor, but you're just not commercial. Mm-hmm. And I think, well, what does commercial mean? I mean, commercial is buying something, but buying something, who needs to buy it and how many do they need to buy? Because I've seen a white young male under 30 get paid $100,000 for their first book. They hadn't written anything and they'd already been paid $100,000 for their first book. Mm-hmm. So it all comes down to whom people want to invest in, whether or not they want your voice to be heard. If I want to do social commentary, they may say, well, there's already Ta-Nehisi Coates. We don't need you. We already have one. And so people are choosing. They may say, well, if we have Nikole Hannah-Jones, then we don't need another Black female reporter or someone who's going to talk about these issues. We already have one. Yet you can have 20, 30, 40, 50, 100. There's no cap on what a white male can do or a white female, but it seems like they choose one Black voice and decide that Black voice is going to be the voice of everybody, and we're going to probably invest something into them, and if they don't sell a certain number of copies over a certain amount of time, they're not commercial enough, we're going to drop them and go to the next flavor.
It's also, I mean, just quickly, like it is exposure. I mean, the research is quite clear that if Black students, for instance, in K-12 are exposed to Black literature and Black history, they are much more likely to engage with it. And you actually see their achievement and test scores and likelihood of graduating improve. But our kids are getting a very Eurocentric curriculum that doesn't reflect them, is actually quite demeaning to them. And then we don't understand why they don't develop certain reading habits. But if you give them something that respects them and engages them, they do read. I spent a year in Detroit. Detroit is the lowest performing school district in the country. I was in the lowest performing school in Detroit. Literacy rate at that school was about 9%. And I sat in there with a teacher who was having the kids read Octavia Butler. And they were reading the passage about when the enslaver found out that the protagonist could read, because this is where they learned that literacy was actually kept from us, that we were prohibited from literacy. And to see that click in the mind of kids who were struggling to read themselves in a school district that was involved in a literacy lawsuit, because that text meant something to them, as opposed to reading texts about things that they could not relate to at all. When class was over, they stayed behind to keep reading, but that is not the normative experience. So we cannot buy into the white supremacist tropes that we have been laboring under for hundreds of years. They're just really not true.
And if I could just interject one quick thing, and that is, I have my students read the Constitution. We export the Constitution around the world. My students read the Constitution. And every time when they finish reading, especially this semester's class, because we've had all these challenges with Zoom and everything else, and they finish reading it, and you can see the connection. You saw the connection going back to this election. When you start talking about government, when you start explaining how these things work, and they get to connect, even with legal issues in the news, they come to class talking about legal issues in the news. All I have to do is sit back and listen to them connect the dots. And once you take that time and you see the spark happen, and I've had this happen in high school, I've had it happen in junior high school, and all the way down to primary school. You connect law, you connect government and how it works, and you get the people engaged, then you let it go and let them grow. But if you don't have that engagement in the first place, and then the expectation is, well, why don't they know more? Why don't they want more? You know, if people wouldn't know to brush their teeth unless you told them how to do it. So it's like, and that starts at a young age. Yeah. And so I don't think it's impossible, but I think it comes down to believing that they're worth the engagement. And I do believe that, because I believe these young people are going to make choices that will affect our lives one day. And we need to get them ready for that. And that comes down to literacy and reading.
Oh, no, I mean, the point you make about the Constitution is important. I mean, I'm teaching both a constitutional law class. For every constitutional law class I teach, I used to buy and give the students a copy of the Constitution. I can't see them, so I just gave them a PDF. But I also gave it to my introduction to public administration students as well. It's amazing that in the United States, most people are really not familiar with the Constitution.
Yeah, most people haven't read it.
I'm sorry?
I said most people haven't read it.
Yeah, no, I haven't read it. And they know about the Second Amendment, and they heard about the Fifth Amendment because they watch Law and Order.
They haven't read the Second Amendment either.
Well, but they hear about, my Second Amendment rights, right?
Yes.
To be able to have a bazooka, and
one solution to this, Wallace, is that is the public libraries, right? Mm-hmm. And connecting the public libraries to the school libraries, but also building up the kind of books that the public libraries carry, right? New York has a very good system of neighborhood public libraries. Many of them are Carnegie libraries, right? And these libraries, I think that the New York Public Library has made, just speaking from the outside, a concerted effort to make neighborhood public libraries more important, right? And if people in the communities and people who run the cities can get more relevant books to public libraries, that would do a great deal, I think, and then make connections with local schools. For schools, many schools don't have extensive libraries because they can't afford it, right? And so that may be a way to spread the knowledge of books that are important for young people to read at an early age.
Yeah, that's very important.
I'm gonna add one more thing. I know this is my area. I've been studying literacy for a while, and I just
yeah, please.
Most Black schools don't even have a decent library in the school. If you go into a white school versus a Black school and you look at simply, do they even have a dedicated library space? What are the number of volumes? The school I was in Detroit had a library with no books in it. There was literally no books in the library, and there was a room, a locked closet. It's a great metaphor for my book, but it's devastating for what it meant for those kids. There was a locked closet with books, and the kids had no access to the books. And then we look down on those kids for not reading, for reading not being natural to them when they are not being provided a foundation in literacy in the first place. So I think we need to really, again, understand that this effort to deprive Black people of literature, of literacy, is a centuries-long endeavor. And so many people who are not readers because it is difficult for them to actually read. They don't have the type of functional literacy that we need. The last thing I'll add to that is people who read hood romance novels. I don't care what you're reading. Nobody looks down on white people for reading Harlequin romance novels, but somehow if Black people are not reading, W.E.B. Du Bois, then we think that they're not readers. Reading is reading, and literature is literature. And I love a good hood novel myself. I just like to pepper it in with some other types of reading as well.
Yeah. One thing, we just got a chat question in here, and I addressed it to all three. of your panelists. They said, can you suggest some books to read? And I'd ask you just if that, if you can just enter into the chat, just hit everyone. If you want to just hit a couple of titles that you might want to suggest people read going forward. We've got a couple of folks, if we were in person somewhere, they'd be lined up at the microphone at this point. So we're going to try and get a couple of folks. And we have Reina Miranda. And I believe you had a question for the panel, please.
Yeah, I'm from New York City, and I'm also an Afro-Latina background Dominican. I'm firstborn American Dominican from a family. And I was just wondering, how do I get my people in my community to actually engage themselves and educate themselves into doing the right thing? Because being with this president, with T45, him being such a racist individual that most of my friends voted for him. And I was really ashamed about that. But then the other part didn't vote for him as well, didn't. So as an Afro-Latina, how do I get people in my community to understand, not even understand, but understand that they have a responsibility to take care of themselves and look out for themselves?
Okay. Jump ball, panel.
Well, you know your community better than we do from the outside, right? Every neighborhood, every community is different. I suspect you have your own ideas about that. We have, maybe the other panelists have specific ideas, but we have general ideas about what can be done. Whether that's trying to direct them to the right kind of literature, to more expansive literature, whether that's, or showing them videos. But beyond that, I would have to fall back on, you obviously know your community. So it's a matter
but the thing is that they're, like you said, like some Hispanics like pretty much say that they're engaging their white culture, right? And in Dominican Republic, we have a diverse culture, which is Taino, which is Arawak, African blood, and the Spaniard blood, the European blood. And me, as for myself, I identify as a Taino Afro-Latina. I don't engage with even though unfortunately, because of the fact of my heritage, I don't engage in the European portion of my heritage. I pretty much engage myself with what I'm supposed to be engaging myself with. And I educated myself as far as who I was, because for years, I didn't understand what the word spick was. For years, I didn't know, I was ignorant and I was blinded to all those things because I was sheltered as a child. But as an adult, I got to realize and understand, not even understand, I'm overstanding that I'm not a spick. I am not a nigger. I am an Afro-Latina, proud and a born American with Dominican roots. And as much as I tell, and I try to educate my people, because I can say our people, because we're all from the same place. We all came from one place, one continent, which is Africa. So that's all that breaks down the whole barrier right there and then. But for me to actually feel such pain because my own culture doesn't want to accept themselves for who they are is really like, it hurts my soul. You know what I'm saying? So I can try to educate my culture. I mean, I've gone as far as hanging out with my friends from Puerto Ricans who also do the same thing. They educate their culture, they educate their people in all ranges of life. But I'm sorry if I sound a little bit emotional, but it hurts. It really hurts. I know how it hurts for African Americans, because when they see me, they don't see a Latina. They see an African American. They don't see nothing else. You know what I'm saying? Dreadlocks and everything. I mean, my locks, my hair, my appearance. They don't see a Hispanic woman. They see a Black woman, an African American woman. That's all they see.
Okay. Ms. Miranda,
yes.
Thank you. It's my job I've got to kind of keep it moving here, but thank you very much for your comments. Really appreciate it. And I was reminded by the chair of our Public Administration Department, Dr. Zlima Blair, that we do have a civil rights reading list at the Medgar Evers College Library, and I think you can even access it still virtually during this lockdown as well. We're going to try for another couple of questions, and then
I just wanted to her point, two things.
Okay.
One, I always say in my classes, be the best you can be. Be the best white man, be the best Latina, be the best black person, be the best whatever fill in the blank that you can be. If you look into your own culture, if you look into your own history, then, and if you like yourself, you don't spend as much time trying to oppress somebody else. Because oppression comes from people, one, steeped in greed, but also with these insecurities that somebody's going to come and take away something you have, or that you have to be at the top of the socio-racial hierarchy. And what really gets me is people want to be. I remember one time, very quickly, I had a manager, and he was an atheist, and he was like, and I'm a Christian. And so he was saying, oh, you believe, he thought it was a joke. He started laughing. Oh, you believe in Christ? That's so funny. I was like, what, you want me to think you're God? And he had the nerve to be, from that day forward, he was offended. Because as a white man, I actually said to him, I do not think you are God. And he took offense. And he didn't even understand why, but I'm sure in the back of his mind, something in him thought he was God. And there are too many white people in this country and around the world who think they're God on earth.
Well, there was the last poets, I think, who said the white man has a God complex. That was a while ago, back in the day, but yeah, it was true then, it is true now. We have a couple more students lined up, and then panel, I'm going to ask you to make some closing remarks before Dr. Brenda Green comes out, and she's going to be singing a song to close the matter out. I didn't mean to spoil the surprise, Dr. Green, I know, but quite seriously, we have Mr. Antoine Wyndham. Mr. Wyndham, are you still there? Yes, there we are. Okay, how are you doing, sir? You had a question for the panel, please?
Yes, my question is, how is it important, like after y'all write y'all books and send it out to the mass majority, or just send it out period, how important is it for every reader to understand the message that y'all wrote in your book?
Wow, okay. Again, jump ball.
I mean, I've written 6 books, and my feeling is I've got to get it out of me, because I'm a creative. That's what I am. I'm a creative person. And so I write plays, and I wanted my people to hear the play, see the play. I have one shot that was just had a reading. I'll send you the link to it. But I want people to get it, but it's like art. They may not get the same thing from it exactly the way I want them to get it. And just like the sister was saying about educating her community, it's not your job to educate the whole world. It's your job to do what you do. And then once you do what you do, you're not God. Then sit back and say, I did the best I could, and let it go. Are you going to end up stroking out, being depressed, giving yourself? I mean, I just had a debate yesterday with a brother from Scottsdale, Arizona, who said that Donald Trump was the greatest achiever of all time. And that the only
Excuse me, Professor Mark, what was the argument?
No, they actually, that's how he introduces himself.
He was in that 18%, huh?
Yeah. But also, the other part that really got me, he said that George Floyd would happen to be a black man who happened to be killed by a white man, and it had nothing to do with race.
There you go.
So you
it's hard to argue that. It's hard to argue. I don't know how you even begin to argue.
But you don't argue it. You set your point and then you leave it. One of the things we do in my class is we learn how to have an argument. Mm-hmm. And the argument could be, yeah, scream, get your blood pressure up. The argument can also be you state your premise, you support that premise, you conclude it, and step away. Because
drop the mic. We have time for a couple more student questions that we're going to put on. We have Lourdes Colon. Are you still there, please?
Yes, Lourdes? I'm still here. Yep.
Okay, well, you had a question for the panel.
Yes, I commented. I'm trying to find it right now.
Okay.
So far in there. I believe it was on, I was going to ask, just like anyone in the panel, regarding incarcerated individuals and their right to vote. And I was just wondering what would you say would be important to implement to ensure that incarcerated individuals, specifically since a majority of incarcerated individuals are African Americans, what would you say we would need to implement to ensure that they have a say in our voting process? And do you believe that that is important to our voting process?
Well, it's
Okay.
very important. And Florida seemed to have made considerable progress. And then the lesson came, right? That is to say, the Republicans in Florida saw what the possible implications of that or possible consequences of that would be. And they shut down that, they tried their best to shut down that process. And they significantly did. Of course, you know, people who have served their time in the penitentiary ought to have the right to vote. There's no question about that. Another question is whether people who are still incarcerated should have the right to vote. But that whole question of felon disenfranchisement is driven by voter suppression. That's what it is.
Well, we know that slavery was abolished in 1865. The 13th Amendment says slavery is abolished as indentured servitude as well, except as punishment for a crime. Then states under the Constitution were given the right to decide the qualifications for voting. And then they said, well, if you're not of good quality and good stature, then you cannot vote. And so then we had the convict lease system that allowed those Black men from 1870 who gained their right to vote with the 15th Amendment to be incarcerated based on trumped up charges of Black codes, loitering, and all of that. So there's always been this connection between undermining the right to vote. Once again, I began with 2 steps forward, 1 step back when it comes to voting rights and having the power over our government. I do believe that people incarcerated should vote. The same way that people did not ask the 3/5 of an African when they decided the number for going to Congress based on the population. So, enslaved person, how can I better represent your interests when I go to Congress? They're not going to go to the incarcerated person and say, how can I better represent your interests as I go to Congress? But they're counting those bodies to make the determination of how many people from that district go to Congress. They're counting those bodies to get federal, state, and local funding. They count those bodies for a political expediency and then ignore them all the rest of the time. So I think they should be able to vote, and we would have a completely different system if they could.
So I'll just quickly, just a fact check. Black people are not the majority of people incarcerated, though Black people are disproportionately incarcerated. So actually, the majority of people who are disenfranchised under these laws are actually white. Which also goes to show that this country will hurt a whole lot of white people if they think they will hurt a disproportionate number of Black folks. I think that committing a crime, being convicted of a crime does not forfeit your citizenship in this country. And so I believe that people should be able to vote from jail. I believe that people should be able to vote from prison. And certainly once you have served your time, you should be able to vote. Your question was, how do you change that? Every state has its own laws about whether felons and people incarcerated can vote or not. I think Vermont, the whitest state in the country, is the only state where people can actually vote from prison. There's a reason for that. So if you want to change that, you have to work to change the laws or to get a federal law passed that prohibits you from being able to ban incarcerated people and people who have served their time from voting.
And we do need federal criminal justice reform. That includes the prosecutor's office, not just what happens with police and not just what happens with the court, but what happens with prosecutors. We've got to have prosecutorial reform. And without national federal reform, then we're not going to change things the same way we needed national federal reform for voting rights, for housing, for education. We need national federal reform just to start beginning to tear up the root. It's going to tear it all up because our criminal justice system began as slave catchers, began as militia to put down Native American uprisings. And so it's very difficult for people who have over-policed our communities and underprotected us to do so with 18,000 jurisdictions and make those changes that will then decrease the number, the disproportionate rate of African Americans, other people of color who are incarcerated. All of these things need to change when it comes to criminal justice. And you people who are young, or you people who are younger mind, are the ones who can make those changes happen.
So I have to respond to this comment in the chat that not every inmate is Malcolm X and a lot of people are in jail for good reasons. Committing a crime does not mean you are no longer a citizen. And I would like that person to really ask yourself, what is the logic behind denying someone the right to vote because they have committed a crime? First of all, probably everybody on here has committed some crime or another. You've sped, you've stolen, you've done something. Does that mean that you are no longer entitled to your rights of citizenship in this country? And if we want people to actually leave prison and join back into society, then you cannot keep them pariahs from their society. So what is the actual logic behind not allowing people who have committed crimes to vote? As someone who has several family members who have been incarcerated, family members who are currently incarcerated, they don't lose their humanity and their citizenship because they have committed a crime. So let's question the logic behind that thinking.
Okay, all right, we have time for, we're going to take one more question from the audience, and Nikole and Gloria and Lee, I'm going to ask you to start thinking about your final comments before we actually close out. We have, I think, Rasul Murray, who's actually a member of the National Black Writers Conference Planning Committee. You had a question, sir?
Yes, thank you, brother. First of all, I want to thank the panel for a really stimulating contribution to the conference, and an amen to Sister Browne-Marshall. I don't think I've ever attended a talk by you that I haven't come away with stimulation and encouragement and affirmation and a whole lot of new ideas. So I thank you especially for continuing that tradition. I want to caution, there was a discussion earlier about the importance of the amount of white progressive participation in the demonstrations this past summer. And it concerns me that I'm old enough to remember the degree of excitement in our community about the degree of white participation in the 1963 March on Washington. And I'm also old enough to remember the degree to which that was very tactical, and much of it not reflected in an ongoing strategic commitment to the freedom of Black people. And so I just offer that caution that we can't necessarily depend but so much on how meaningful that white progressive participation is going to be moving forward. But thank you again, and let the conference continue.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if that wasn't really a question, of course, but would anyone like to comment before we get into our final closing remarks?
I mean, I really want to agree with that, except we are a 13% minority in a majority white country. And so it is impossible for us to get laws passed, policies passed that actually further our community if we are not doing that in coalition with white people. We do not have to convince a majority of white Americans, which you saw with the election of Barack Obama. He won with a white minority and a majority of everyone who wasn't white, but it would be impossible in a 13%, as a perpetual 13% minority, for us to think that we can accomplish these things without a white coalition building.
And it's not just getting the laws passed, of course, it's the enforcement and
implementation. Exactly, and policies, right? So, yeah, I wish, we all wish that were not the case.
It's up to every group to lead
please.
Liberation.
I'm sorry?
It's up to every group to lead its own liberation.
Right.
That does not preclude coalition politics. Strategically done.
And I say we are worthy allies seeking worthy allies. And we have shown our worthiness so long that it's impossible to deny. And so I know that you can, I always say this, for one, we're in election season, don't be a cheap political date. Okay, what are you getting for your vote? It's like, and the other is, you don't have to have a marriage. You're just going to be living together for this particular political moment. You find your commonalities, but this whole idea that people think they're giving us something, that we're just some kind of orphan child, that you know, we're like these, you know, save the whales 1 month and then save Black people the next. That's not the way this rolls. And I think people of color, especially people of African descent, have paid too high a price, have made too many changes, and shown their power in too many ways to be ignored. We need to make sure we exercise, navigate, and figure out how to best use that political power. And then other people who need us, as we saw in this election, will be allies. That doesn't mean we're married, we're allies.
Okay, thank you. Nikole, any final remarks you'd like to make? And let me just say this, I'm probably overstepping my bounds with the National Black Writers Conference, but we'd love to have all three of you back the next time we have an opportunity to do so. I want to thank you in advance for really a very stimulating and useful conversation. With that, Nikole Hannah-Jones, I was going to say, is there anything you'd like to say? But that would be kind of superfluous. Would you please share with us your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just be quick. I would just say we should always keep in mind that the battle will never be over. The fight will always continue. I think we tend to think that if we just win this one last fight, our work will be done, but that's never been the case for Black people for a day in this country. And so we must ever be vigilant and ever ready for the fight. And with that, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Sorry, Lee, if these two women kind of overtalked you, but that's kind of what we do sometimes.
No, it was stimulating.
Okay, good. I kind of felt bad, but not enough to stop talking. So anyway, I appreciate everyone who joined the talk, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
Okay, Brother Daniels, following up on Nikole's mea culpa of sorts, would you?
We don't need any mea culpa.
Once you get the last word.
I would just say that I opened with the anecdote about me the night of Martin Luther King's assassination, and my focusing on difficult days ahead, and his comment. And I've always tried to live my life that way, right? Understanding that it's not the promised land, it's the difficult days ahead that one should focus on, which to me refers back to what both Gloria and Nikole have said about the moments we have lived all the way through since then, and the moment we're in now, and the difficult days ahead, the recognition of that, and the recognition that struggling against the difficult days ahead is our legacy, because every generation of Black people has had to face not only the difficult days of the present, but the difficult days ahead.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you very much again for all three of you, Gloria Browne-Marshall, Nikole Hannah-Jones, and Lee Daniels. One thing that I would say in closing is that in terms of the power of writing, it should never, ever be underestimated. There's a book that probably gets a bad rap, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which came out in the 1850s. Was not written for Black people, certainly, but what it did was it at least conveyed this notion of the humanity of Black people to white people. And one can argue that that was a major movement in terms of moving the abolitionist movement forward and leading towards all the things that came from that. I would just say that when we're talking about the battle going forward, there are all the agenda of specific rights and grievances that need to be addressed for sure. But I would submit to you that in all the writing that the three of you are doing, and that I certainly try to do, and many others, is to convey the humanity of Black people. Because if you can accept someone else as a human being and not as the other, that's the first step towards really, it's not even accept, it recognize someone as a human being and not as the other. That is the first step towards some kind of real progress. Because as long as you're the other, someone can do whatever they want to you and not feel any shame at all with respect to that. So to the extent that I know all three of you, your writings do endeavor to convey that humanity, that is such an important role. And I want to just express my thanks for all of your readers and all the readers you're going to have after today for what you do. So thank you so much. And Dr. Green, if she could snatch me off the stage right now. But
well, you did.
But I'm going to stop.
Professor Ford, you did the closing. You did the closing. No, thank you so much, everyone. This was such a stimulating conversation. There's so many pearls of wisdom, and you talked on so many topics for how we move forward, you know, with around our race and education and voting and the importance of struggle. The reading list, you see the Center for Black Literature has a reading list on its website, and Professor Zulema Blair put up the link for the reading list on the Medgar Evers College site. So you have given us a way forward out of this despair that we see. We have to remember, as someone said, the struggle continues. The struggle continues, but it's a beautiful struggle, and we will always have to struggle. I want to thank the Center for Black Literature staff, the National Black Writers Conference Committee, who volunteer their time. I also want to remind you to complete your evaluation forms. Please, we really need that. It helps us sustain the center. Your feedback is really important to us. It helps sustain programming, and it helps us to chart the way we move forward. I also encourage you, some of you filled out a survey, a poll survey. We're going to share the results of the survey. And I want to encourage you to come back next week for our formal opening of the National Black Writers Conference, November the 11th. You can register online go to centerforblackLiterature.org, and you can look up the National Black Writers Conference and register. I encourage you to go on Twitter, to follow us on Twitter and on the Center for Black Literature Facebook page. And there's the poll. So did you register to vote? 17, well, there were 17, everyone 100% registered to vote. 88% had a plan for voting. 47% said it took 20 minutes. So you can see the results there. We plan to really have these polls moving forward and to give you a way to interact with us. So again, let's give a big heartfelt welcome. I'm sorry, thank you. Thank you. I want to start all over again. Thank you to all of our panelists. I'm just really, really excited. And it brought so many diverse views, and the questions were really critical and thought-provoking. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Good night.
Want to see you next week.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, Professor.
This was amazing. Thank you so much, Professor, for telling us to join.